Yeah, this is just a heartbreaking story. Developments coming almost every hour of this story. We just received the affidavit from Memphis police that says 4-year-old Sequoia Samuels has been dead for weeks. They say, Memphis police say that the mother, 24-year-old Brittany Jackson, lied about the statement that Samuels was missing.
Some secrets are buried so deep, they take a 4-year-old's disappearance to claw their way to the surface. Memphis, Tennessee. Caldwell Avenue. A street where porch lights stay on and neighbors still wave. Where the biggest scandal is usually whose trash can rolled into the street. But on this particular June morning, that illusion of safety would shatter like glass on concrete. The feeding tube was still warm when they found the empty bed. 4-year-old Sequoia Samuels, fragile as a bird, brave as a lion, had been sleeping in her tiny body that had already fought battles most adults couldn't imagine. Her medical equipment hummed quietly in the darkness, a mechanical lullaby that had become the soundtrack of her short life. By dawn, that same equipment sat abandoned. Useless. The front door gaped open like a wound, and the house held its breath. Brittany Jackson's scream could be heard 3 houses down. She's gone. Oh God, she's gone. Within minutes, Caldwell Avenue transformed into a war zone. Police cars descended like vultures. Helicopters carved circles in the sky, their rotors beating a frantic rhythm. K-9 units pressed their noses to the ground, searching for a scent that seemed to have vanished into thin air. The neighborhood filled with strangers, detectives, reporters, volunteers, all hunting for one little girl who weighed less than a bag of groceries. Her face appeared on every telephone pole, every storefront window. Those wide, trusting eyes seemed to follow you down the street, asking a question that would haunt an entire city. Where is Sequoia? But here's what nobody knew as they searched those first desperate hours. Sometimes the most dangerous predator is the one who calls your name sweetly, who tucks you in at night, who knows exactly how to make you disappear. Because the truth about Sequoia Samuels wouldn't just break hearts. It would reveal that monsters don't always hide under beds. Sometimes they sleep in the room right next to yours.
No, but this is my auntie, a beacon. She's the pastor, a beacon. They have taught us nothing but to love everybody, to treat people like we want to be treated. And for this to happen, it's a big blow for us, y'all. It's a big blow. It is.
Did you talk to Brittany while the search was going on?
I did. I told her to call the police. We were over in that area back there, and I said, Brittany, we were searching for. I said, Brittany, have you called the police? And she said, no, ma'am, and she called them. So I thank God for that, that we got.
June 15th, 2023. The morning sun came up over North Memphis, but something was terribly wrong on Caldwell Avenue. Inside apartment 3B, Brittany Jackson ran from room to room, her heart pounding. The front door was wide open. Cold air rushed in, and her 4-year-old daughter was gone. Sequoia? Baby, where are you? Nothing. Just silence. Her hands shook as she dialed 911. My baby's gone. The door was open. She's gone. The words came out between sobs, each one breaking her heart a little more. Police cars arrived fast, their red and blue lights flashing. Officers jumped out and spread across the street. Their radios buzzed with urgent voices, but you could see it in their faces. They knew this wasn't good. Then they found the video. A doorbell camera down the street had been recording. At 3 a.m., it caught something that made everyone's blood run cold. A tiny figure walking alone in the dark. Light blue shirt. Black pants with little hearts. Pink slippers. And the feeding tube wrapped around her small body. The tube that kept her alive. Sequoia Samuels. Walking by herself. Walking away. Walking into the night. The police watched the video over and over. There she was, this little girl who needed help to eat, who weighed almost nothing, who had been sick her whole life, wandering into the Memphis darkness like she was sleepwalking. The search exploded across the neighborhood. Police dogs arrived, pulling hard on their leashes, desperate to find her scent. But there was nothing. The German shepherds whined as they searched, sensing something was wrong. Helicopters flew overhead, their loud blades beating like drums. Bright lights swept across yards and empty lots. The pilots' voices came through the radios. Nothing here. Moving to the next area. Police on four-wheelers roared through tall grass and abandoned lots. Officers walked side by side through the streets, calling her name until their voices went raw. Memphis police, county sheriff, state investigators, FBI. Everyone came to help find one little girl. By late morning, neighbors joined the search. They came out of their houses with flashlights, even though it was daylight. They called her name, Sequoia. Sequoia. But the sound seemed to disappear into the hot, thick air. Old women stood on their porches, crying. Kids pressed their faces to windows, not understanding why all the grown-ups looked so scared. A lady from 3 blocks away watched her security camera footage over and over, hoping she might have seen something. Anything. News reporters showed up with cameras. They spoke with shaky voices. She has a feeding tube. She needs medical care. Any information could save her life. But even they seemed to know this story might not end well. Every minute felt like forever. The search went on all afternoon, but Sequoia was still missing. She was there one moment in that grainy video, gone the next, like she had just disappeared into nothing. As the sun started to set on that terrible day, everyone who had seen that doorbell camera footage had the same question. How does a 4-year-old girl with a feeding tube just vanish? The answer, when it finally came, would break everyone's heart. But first, the truth about Sequoia's life would have to come out. And that truth was darker than anyone searching those streets could have imagined.
Unfit. She could have gave it to me. I would have took her. Now tonight, as you can see, the search efforts are continuing. We still have community members that are also out here searching for Sequoia. Now, police have yet to say if any charges will or have been filed. Of course, we'll be sure to let you know.
Sequoia's grandmother sits in her living room now, staring at the empty chair where her granddaughter used to curl up. Her hands shake as she talks about the visits that haunt her dreams. Every time Sequoia came to her house in North Memphis, something was wrong. New bruises covered her tiny arms like purple flowers. Small burns dotted her soft skin. Once, there was a handprint on her leg, dark and angry, far too big for such a small child. She would run to me, the grandmother says, her voice breaking. She'd wrap her little arms around my neck and hold on so tight, like she was drowning and I was the only thing keeping her alive. The worst part wasn't the marks on Sequoia's body. It was what happened when it was time to go home. She didn't want to go back, the grandmother whispers, tears streaming down her face. She cried. She pleaded. She begged me not to take her home. But what could she do? Sequoia wasn't hers to keep. The family had tried everything. They called the Tennessee Department of Human Services over and over. They reported the bruises, the burns, the way Brittany Jackson seemed checked out, like she wasn't really there. They told them about the neglect, the injuries, the fear in Sequoia's eyes. Nothing changed. Case files were opened and closed like revolving doors. Complaints were written down and forgotten. The system that was supposed to protect Sequoia failed her every single time. Sequoia's father's family tried too. They offered to take her in, to give her a safe place to grow up. But the answer was always the same. Each time, Sequoia was sent back to the same house. Back to the same walls that were never safe for her. The grandmother remembers one visit that still makes her sick. She asked Sequoia if someone had hurt her. The little girl didn't answer. She just buried her face in her grandmother's chest, her whole body shaking. Her small hands gripped tight, like she was holding on to the only good thing in her world. She didn't have to say anything. The fear in her eyes said everything. Even now, the grandmother can still feel the weight of Sequoia's arms around her neck. The desperate way she held on. The strength of a 4-year-old who knew the difference between safe and dangerous, between love and something much darker. Those little arms had been trying to tell her something. A warning that no one listened to until it was too late. By the second day, the search for Sequoia Samuels had taken over North Memphis. Police cars lined Caldwell Avenue like soldiers in formation, their red and blue lights flashing in the early morning fog. The lights never stopped. They pulsed like a heartbeat, reminding everyone that time was running out. Helicopters circled overhead, their blades cutting through the thick air. Searchlights swept across rooftops and backyards, looking for any sign of a little girl who seemed to have vanished into thin air. Memphis police made a promise to the cameras. We've deployed K-9 resources, aviation units, and ATVs. We're leaving no stone unturned. Their voices were calm and professional, but you could see the worry in their eyes.
We've deployed K-9 resources, we've deployed aviation, we've had officers and deputies on ATVs. We're leaving no stone unturned. We're using as many resources as we can get our hands on and neighboring resources to ensure that we get to us.
They knew what everyone else was starting to realize. This wasn't looking good. Teams of officers and federal agents searched everywhere. Abandoned houses with broken windows. Thick weeds growing along alleyways. Empty lots where anything could be hidden. K-9 units moved fast, their noses pressed to the ground, desperate to catch Sequoia's scent. ATVs roared down dirt paths, their tires cutting deep tracks as deputies pushed the search wider and wider. But in the neighborhood, something else was growing. The neighbors stood on their porches, talking in hushed voices. They whispered about Brittany's story, wondering how it could be true. How does a 4-year-old child, barefoot and connected to a feeding tube, wander out in the middle of the night without anyone hearing? A cousin from Sequoia's father's side spoke to the news reporters. She shook her head, her face tight with worry. She never went to doors on her own before. Something isn't adding up. Everyone had seen the doorbell camera footage by now. That grainy clip from 3 a.m. showed a tiny figure walking alone in the dark. Her small body was lit up by a porch light as she shuffled past with slow, uncertain steps. The feeding tube was still attached to her stomach, swinging slightly as she moved. Then she disappeared into the darkness. That single image burned into everyone's minds. A 4-year-old girl, walking alone in the night, walking toward something no one could see. The neighborhood had changed completely. Flyers with Sequoia's smiling face covered every light pole and storefront window. Residents kept their porch lights on all night. They watched their security cameras over and over, hoping to catch something the police had missed. Some joined the search on foot, walking through the streets calling her name with voices full of hope and fear. But underneath all the activity, tension was building. The whispers were getting louder. The questions were getting harder to ignore. Why hadn't anyone acted sooner to protect her? How could a sick little girl vanish so completely, with no sound, no struggle, no trace? And the question that nobody wanted to ask out loud: what if the person who knew where Sequoia was had been lying to them all along?
Well, Greg, it's now been more than 19 hours since Sequoia Samuels was reported missing. I want you to take a look behind me. You can see an MPD cruiser still remains here outside the street where police say she was last seen. Her whereabouts still tonight unknown. Tonight, this image is plastered throughout North Memphis as 4-year-old Sequoia Samuels remains missing.
It's a medical condition, and if you see her, please bring her home. Call the police. Call somebody.
By mid-afternoon on June 15th, everything changed. Inside Sequoia's small apartment, detectives started noticing things that didn't make sense. The bedsheets looked perfect, like no child had slept there in days. There were no toys scattered around, no crumbs from a midnight snack, no signs that a little girl had been living there recently. The air felt dead, too quiet for a home that had supposedly lost a child just hours before. Brittany Jackson sat on the couch while officers searched every room. She watched them work, her voice steady and calm. Too calm. She answered their questions in a flat tone, her eyes staring at nothing. The more she talked, the more the investigators' doubts grew. Something was very wrong here. As suspicion grew, officers expanded their search beyond the apartment. They looked in dumpsters, storage areas, anywhere someone might try to hide something. And then they found it. Inside a dark trash bin near the apartment complex, wrapped tight in black plastic bags, was the small body of 4-year-old Sequoia Samuels. Even the veteran detectives went silent. They had seen terrible things before, but this was different. This fragile child, whose smiling face had been on missing posters just hours earlier, was now lying lifeless among the garbage like she was nothing. The truth came out slowly, in pieces that made everyone sick. Brittany's boyfriend, Jalen Hobson, confessed first. He admitted to helping get rid of the body, claiming Sequoia had died at home and that he and Brittany didn't know what to do. Later, Brittany herself told them where to find the trash bin and what really happened in that apartment. The neighborhood was in shock. People who had spent hours searching for Sequoia now stood frozen on the sidewalk, tears streaming down their faces. Yellow police tape went up around the scene like a barrier between hope and horror. Balloons and candles started appearing on the sidewalk. No one spoke. What was there to say? The search was over. But the real nightmare of Sequoia's story was just beginning. All those hours of searching, all those prayers, all those people who believed a little girl was out there somewhere, waiting to be rescued. She had been dead the whole time. And the woman who had cried on television, begging for her baby to come home, had known exactly where she was. By nightfall on June 15th, yellow tape still fluttered in the warm Memphis air like broken promises. The search for Sequoia Samuels was over, but something much worse was just beginning. Inside the police station, officers sat across from Brittany Jackson and her boyfriend, Jalen Hobson. The questions weren't gentle anymore. The tone was ice cold. And slowly the truth came pouring out. Jalen spoke first. He admitted he had helped Brittany wrap Sequoia's tiny body in plastic bags and carry her to the trash bin like she was garbage. He claimed the little girl had died at home weeks earlier. Weeks? Not hours. Not that morning. Weeks ago. In their panic, he said, they decided to hide her instead of calling for help. Brittany's story matched his, word for word. Her voice was eerily calm as she described the moment they sealed her daughter's small body in black garbage bags. She talked about it like she was discussing the weather, her eyes staring at nothing. No tears. No emotion. Nothing. Hours later, the arrests came. Both Brittany Jackson and Jalen Hobson were taken into custody, their hands cuffed tight behind their backs. Reporters' cameras flashed as they were led away. The charges hit like a sledgehammer: first-degree murder, aggravated child abuse, evidence tampering, and neglect of a corpse. Their mugshots were released to the public. In hers, Brittany stared blank into the camera, her face showing nothing. No grief. No remorse. Nothing. Jalen's face was tight, his eyes looking down, like he couldn't bear to look at what he'd done. Officials from the Shelby County Sheriff's Office and the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation held a press conference. "This is a tragedy beyond words," one official said, his voice heavy. "Our priority now is ensuring justice for Sequoia." But in the community, anger and heartbreak exploded. How could two adults hide the death of a child for weeks? How could they let hundreds of people search for a little girl they knew was already dead? Why hadn't anyone stepped in sooner when there were so many warning signs? The questions that haunted everyone were simple but devastating. Where were the people who were supposed to protect her? Why didn't the system work? Why did everyone fail this innocent child? As Brittany and Jalen were booked into jail, one thing became crystal clear. All those hours of searching, all those prayers, all those people who believed in hope. It had all been a lie. Sequoia's voice had been silenced forever, but her story was screaming louder than ever. And everyone who had failed her would have to live with that scream for the rest of their lives. 2 days later, people gathered in North Memphis to remember Sequoia. They brought candles and stuffed animals. They held a photo of her smiling face and released pink and white balloons into the sky. But this wasn't just about saying goodbye. People were angry. She cried out for help and nobody listened, one woman said. Now she's gone. The crowd wanted answers. How could a little girl with bruises and burns be ignored by the system? Why didn't anyone step in when her family called for help? Sequoia's grandmother stood quietly, watching the balloons disappear. She should have been safe, she whispered. Sequoia Samuels was 4 years old. She couldn't protect herself. She needed the adults around her to keep her safe. They failed her. Her story is a reminder that child abuse has warning signs. There are cries for help. When we ignore them, children die. Sequoia's voice is gone, but her story remains. It's a story that demands we do better, that we listen, that we protect the children who can't protect themselves. Because they should all be safe.